Now I get to do another fun thing. Because I get to introduce the speaker today. Because people said, well, you know him best. Because most of you know who come here all the time that he's usually sitting next to me and supporting me. But today I'm sitting next to him and supporting him. David and I met in the vegetable section. What's it called? The produce section at Farm Fresh, even though we both worked at the Heritage store. But he worked in the back and never came out of the back room, and I worked in the bookstore part-time, and we never actually, our paths weren't crossing. So we met in the produce section. And then he kind of adopted all my friends and adopted the fellowship, and you guys all adopted him as well. Not that he didn't have his own friends, but he adopted all of this family too. So he's definitely part of the fellowship family. Some of you may have actually seen him when he did come out of the back room at the Heritage, but he was there for 31 years in the back helping people with the Edgar Casey products, and with a lot of physical healing as well as emotional healing, because I know people used to call and he would tell me he would get on the phone with them, and if they needed other kind of counseling, he would do that on the phone with them. Don't know if his boss knew he was doing that, but he was changing people in other ways as well. And one of the ways that he really touches people is he talks about his near-death experience. And although David is a Scorpio, which are usually considered secretive people, he is the least secretive person I have ever met, because he will tell someone in the grocery store or wherever he's at if he feels that there's something that they need, and he sees that in their eyes, that they need that connection or they need that story. And so I think it's really important to be vulnerable and tell your story, and that's something that he does so well. He is one of the kindest and most selfless people that always puts others before himself, and I know that firsthand because I see him do it all the time. And people ask me often, is he really that positive? Because he's so positive and so good at reframing everything that happens and finding the good in it. And that goes along with finding the good in every single person. And so please welcome him as I would welcome him, my sweetie, and your speaker today, David Riblet.
Okay, that's as good as it gets today. The song, the introduction. No, well, thank you. I mean, I love sharing my story because I think we are meant to be storytellers. We are meant to help uplift people, empower people, and we do that by genuinely expressing what things have meant to us. This is on my near death today, but it's also on my recent fall from a complicit ladder. I'll explain what a complicit ladder is when I get closer to that. But all of it really ties together. It's on grace. It's on the grace we have in our life. Because if you think of all the things that happen in our lives and how we walk out of them, and we're still perfectly fine, you know, my near death being a great example, falling off the ladder being a great example. Going further back, I believe that grace actually happens with people when we're looking out for the highest good of everybody involved. So if we're service-oriented and we care about other people, we're going to have grace with us to an even greater degree. I think everybody has grace all the time, but it's more likely to manifest. And unfortunately, I've had to have grace pull me out of some holes that, like the near death, that maybe I shouldn't have had to be pulled out of. Going back a little bit before that, I started my service work. High school, we were in a student community that actually got our city to do streetwide recycling in the early 1970s. First place in Pennsylvania that was doing that. We used some of that money to save a 300-year-old farmhouse that was deeded from William Penn that was going to be turned into apartments and also office buildings, and it had a climax forest with trees in all 4 stages of development. We save that. I get to college. I'm a business major. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But in my 3rd year, and I'm going to move kind of fast here because there's a lot to try to get to the end of this, which I'm going to culminate with something connected with Paul Solomon. So in college, I still don't know what I'm going to do, even though I'm a business major. I'm in my 3rd year, and I asked to help people. And that became the defining moment of my life, because once I said, I want to help people, that then took the rest of my life and attracted what was going to go on to make that possible. Also in that 3rd year, for some reason, for 3 days, I went into the Unity experience and actually managed to understand how everything worked. And that stayed with me strongly into the 3rd day when it faded away again. But I think that was the basis of what I had available should I need to tap into it. So also in my 3rd year, now I grew up in a suburban household in Philadelphia. My mom had Edgar Cayce books, Jean Dixon books, Ruth Montgomery books, Charity of the God by Eric Von Daniken. She did yoga and stood on her head for 10 minutes every day. I didn't totally get that, but, I figured she did. So anyway, I read this book, Edgar Cayce on Atlantis, and I immediately reread it. And that moved me down here 2 years later. Now, throughout this time, things have been happening. I didn't really connect them into grace. But right after college, I was out on the West Coast. I was with a group of individuals. I was swimming. I was in a really good mood. And I was swimming in this creek. And I didn't realize that you had to be careful in the creek, just like an ocean or a lake or anywhere else. My arms and legs got so leaden that I could not swim to shore. And I called for help. I had to ask for help. Nobody came immediately. They couldn't believe I needed help. But then I asked again, and they said, he's serious. So somebody came and pulled me to shore. So lucky. That could have been it then. But through grace and through all the access to our soul family and higher loving beings that are available all the time. Sometimes they're walking around in human bodies. Well, that day, that person was walking around in the human body and they rescued me. Another day, I was helping in a plumbing warehouse, cleaning out 40 years worth of plumbing stuff. And I went to walk down the fire escape, and I'm walking down the 3-story fire escape, heavy motor in my hands, and I stepped down from the top level onto the next step. Next thing I know, I'm looking back up from where I just stepped down from. Even though I have a heavy motor in my hands, I'm watching that step at the floor, 3 stories below. Grace. Angels. Thank you. Don't need to know exactly. But, that has run through my life. It wasn't until my near death that I could actually go back and see the more major manifestations of it through some of the things that had already happened. But I was able to do it at that point. And, and it's with us in all the little things, too. So I come to Virginia Beach. I become a shipper at the Heritage Store. Well, I worked for a Quaker store, Things Unlimited, for a while, that some of the folks that are in this community would know, that benefited Friends School. Worked there for a couple of years, went to the Heritage Store as a shipper, began to work my way up. I helped in the lab when they needed it. I telemarketed. I started to order the products in the catalog that we didn't make. I became the bookkeeper. Meanwhile, even though I was in this place that's, a light center in this town, I was still feeling at a loss. I was feeling alone. It's very hard to feel alone when you're surrounded by a lot of people, but it happens. There are a lot of people that feel that, and they don't necessarily identify it. They don't necessarily ask for help. all I needed to do was express myself like I am now. I would never have that problem happen now. I've learned an awful lot over the course of my life. But I would ask for help. And all kinds of help was available, but I didn't ask. I ended up in a relationship with somebody who I felt deeply in love with, who, all of us are spiritual beings having a human experience, but this happened to be someone who was more materially oriented. That does not change love. Love wants to be love. And so we had some pretty rough patches. One of the things that happened is we got pregnant. And that child, I think, was not coming into an environment that was best for the child. And the child miscarried. And I realized that the woman I was with wanted a suit and a tie. She didn't want a guy with long hair and a beard and boots who was a shipper. Okay? Yeah, that's okay. We're each our own human being. But we were best friends, and we laughed a lot, and we loved each other, even if we weren't perhaps a match that way. So we continued on as best friends and continued in a relationship. And, you know, I got over the fact that at that time I felt when that was a soul family member coming in, and that soul family member didn't come in, and I could have made better choices to be maybe with somebody who would have been a match for me, and that soul would have come in. Well, we stayed together, and we got pregnant again. But this time I didn't, and we miscarried again. But this time I didn't handle it. And I didn't ask for help. And I did ask one night when we were together, because we kind of put a little distance with ourselves, as we each needed to heal a little bit. I didn't ask for help. And that night, when we did see each other just for a little while, and I was so distraught, and I went home, and I got in the bathtub, I took a hairdryer, and I dropped it in the bathtub. Thank God for grace. And I still have something with my shoulder from that. And, you know, so I was looking down on my inert body from the other side, and I made a joke. I said, I was never very good with technology, not even with hair dryers. And so, you know, it's quite different, because I was no longer alone, and I realized I'd never been alone. I had all this love and support right by me, but I wasn't letting it in, because I wasn't connecting. And so I was still attached to the silver cord. If many of you have been to near-death speakers, you'll hear that be one of the things we'll talk about, a silver cord. I was seeing white amorphous shapes, and they were other parts of myself. It's kind of an odd way to think of things, other parts of myself, but they're outside myself. And I also realized later that they were also soul family. Those other parts of myself were also soul family. How was that? Well, one of the incredible blessings, because this experience that could have been my greatest tragedy has become my greatest blessing. And so basically, I realized that I was not just a spiritual being as an individual, but we are spiritual beings as soul families. And those soul families are there if we ask for inspiration, if we ask for guidance, if we ask for help. The one who's best able to help us will help us. That can include an extended set of light beings like angels and, and other beings, because I've experienced things that I can't put into words at other times in my life. So Anyway, I had this experience. I realized that I'd like to come back. I realized I wasn't meant to go out at that time. I tried to get back and I can't. Up on the other side, the woman and I who had the 2 miscarriages, and the souls of those 2 children agreed that we would come back as a nuclear family and that they would actually be our 2 sons. Now, we were not originally supposed to be together, this woman and I, but I was so lonely I forced the issue. I was supposed to find somebody who was living out their more spiritual side and be with them and do my life work with them, but that didn't happen because I forced it. So anyway, here we are, the 2 children and the woman who would become my wife, because we weren't married at the time. We stay together 5 years later, because this actually happened May 8th of 1989. 5 years later, we got married. We have the 2 children. The way I got back, actually, though, was I asked with all my heart to come back and help people. And if you notice a trend in my life, it has to do with service and helping people. Because I think as we're out there to help other people help us as fully, and I think we attract things differently. So I came back. There was a caveat, though. I was not to remember this soul agreement, because in 10 years or so, we were not going to stay a nuclear family, because the 2 sons had asked to go ahead and experience what it was like to have a family where the father was not present. So even though I fully supported them the whole time, I love them every bit as much. In fact, I think sometimes you love more when you love somebody and let something happen that's a pre-birth plan, like what happened on the other side. We agreed what we'd do as a family. We agreed on the experiences we wanted to have. And so I started my spiritual path again, and that was in 2005. And I started it by walking, of all things. I walked 2 hours a day with my 2 sons. Sometimes both were there. Sometimes my younger one, we used to do what we called a cat walk, where we walked, and he knew the name of every cat in the neighborhood. He loved that. I love that. I love them. Still do. Haven't seen him since 2006. I love him. So then, I go on my spiritual path. I do Native American medicine stuff. I'm walking around the backyard communing with the flowers and the trees, and my wife is looking at me and thinking, he's lost it. And from her shoes, I can see that. So anyway, I eventually go to the Glide Helper Prayer Group at ARE. I was compelled to go. I believe as we do prayer to heal others, we heal ourselves. It's kind of like in an infinity sign. So we heal others, we heal ourselves. So we heal ourselves, we heal others. I was no longer a vibrational match to the woman I was with, and the kids were suffering every time I would come and see them, because I moved out. And I moved back in just to see them, but we were different. We couldn't make it work. So I began all the things that I have done since that time that are to help people. I'm a glad helper still. We pray for people not even wanting to know what they think is wrong with them, because that is a symptom, and the cause can often come from something far different. So I've had an amazing life over those years, although I have not seen my sons, but we agreed not to see each other, and I honor that, and they're honoring that. When that changes, if it changes, I'm not privy to that still. I continue to help people with the Heritage Store products, the aggregation products. We have helped millions of people over the years with those products. But life does continue to go on, and I've grown spiritually through a lot of different adventures that I've had. with the Abraham material, with Drumble and Melchizedek and the Flower of Life material, with everyday life. Cheryl and I find spiritual adventures together wherever we go. This latest one I wasn't expecting, and this is where we get to the complicit ladder. And I think I termed it that way just because I like the whole idea of the word complicit. But the ladder had to agree to do this for me. So this is what happened recently in September. Was that someday in September or December, Bruce?
September.
Florence was coming. I had a Monday off. I got up. I was going to get the gutters clean, because you want the gutters clean for the ladder, for the store. And I got the front just fine. And I go to the back, and wouldn't you know that the board we haven't fixed on the deck, that I have gotten on that ladder for a couple of years and cleaned the gutter every time. That day, somehow, I had it on there, and I stepped on there, and the ladder flipped, it twisted. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground next to the deck. It hit my hip. I yelled a little bit, not wanting to scare Cheryl, who was on the other side of the house. And she went and checked on the neighbor, who's like 70 or 80, and she thought maybe she heard something. She thought they got her. But it was me. So I kind of got up. I was able to walk through the garage to the front when she came around and said, I need help. So she did Reiki. And then I called a friend, Dave Bennett, and Dave came over and did a white light treatment. And if you ever get a white light treatment from Dave, it takes you right into the unity field. And I walked out of that blissful as all get out, thinking about I had beings doing surgery on me up in the white light, and I knew it. I don't know who they are exactly. And Cheryl's just beside herself because I've gotten hurt, and I'm like blissful. Sorry about that, honey. And, but that experience, we healed it physically, and because of time, I won't go into that all that much. We did everything. Apple cider vinegar packs, comfrey packs, the Beamer, arnica, you name it. But I got on the biomat. And when I got on the biomat, which is an infrared device, the first time, I couldn't get on it for a few weeks. I couldn't get up and down off it. I was hurt too bad. For like 4 weeks, I really couldn't do much of anything. But as I get on the biomat, one day I'm lying there, and I have this experience. And I'm up, and in the experience, I was on a ship in a storm. And I was up in the rigging, and I fell. And I fell on the deck. Notice anything similar to this life? I fell on the deck. But in that life, I died. And in that life, I blamed somebody. I'm still not sure who. But I saw this hilarious picture, which was of this large teacup. And the only thing you could see were 2 different sets of legs sticking up. No clothing on them, just 2 legs sticking up, kicking. And that's because I was in my cups when I went up to fix the rigging. I'd been drinking. I blamed somebody else. Hey, maybe if I'd been sober, it would have come out different. In my cups is a very old phrase, if any of you have ever heard it. So okay, that's one life. That's interesting. A week later, I'm on the biomat again. I see a buckboard. I see, by the way, if you get an idea, I travel when I get on the biomat. I go back to past lives. And so I got on this buckboard, and I saw a young man. And I saw a young woman, and they were happy and they were in love. Then later the scene changed, and I called out to Cheryl because I'd been on there for half an hour and I needed her to write some stuff down, and I got 4 messages. One of them was, we're out of water. One of them was, we're doomed. And I saw at the end the woman with her head down on the side, and I knew that they'd both passed. And that was the second life that I went. So there's something going on that I'm learning from this experience. Through grace, what am I to learn? And the next thing that happens is I'm asking, what is the third life? I know there's a third life. What is the third life? I can't figure it out. A couple weeks later, I finally figured out, the third life is this one. It's this life where I fall off the ladder and I hit the deck and I get hurt, but not as badly as those other two lives, because those lives I died. The life I fell off the rigging onto the deck. So I realize actually also, and you know, a lot of people think of reincarnation, you take past lives and you take what happened, and then you go ahead and decide, oh, I'll heal that by having something to bring something up that I can work on. So, you know, you look at it, forgive me for walking away, you have a life in the 1200s, okay? And, okay, that's one life. Say that was a ship. Let's say the life in the 1700s was the buckboard. Then say the life now was falling off the ladder. That's linearly going from past to present. But what I realized is it also works the other way. And in my particular case, it was actually falling off the ladder that I used as the first life to go back and decided to create the other lives. So actually in 2018, I created the one life. Then whenever the buckboard was, I created the other. And then the last life had been the ship. So it's not as simple because time is all now. There is no past, present, or future. All the dimensions are in this one spot, as many of today's top speakers talk about. So we're creating from that one time. And when we create from that one time, we don't create in a linear basis. We can pick any life out of there and choose it to be what influences something else that happens to us at some other time. So to end, because we've got about 5 minutes, I'm going to tie this very quickly into Edgar Cayce and Paul Solomon. Edgar Cayce came in 1870-something, 77 probably. And he came in and worked with Gladys. Then later on there was a soul family that was working with him. And the next phase that came in were Gertrude, his secretary, and Yu Lin. And then other soul family have come in at different times. So the whole work can be meaningful throughout this whole time. You can relate that to Paul Solomon, because I believe that Paul actually had a 2011 regression that was talking about Jesus, but it also talked about that Paul had come in and done the stuff that he had to do. That was all it said, like one sentence. Okay, so in that life, Paul came in and did something meaningful for the world, and it rippled out. In this life, Paul Solomon came in, and he did something meaningful more than this. I know, I never met him, but he created this church. He founded this church, and all you wonderful people. And all of you who were very involved then, and the Inner Light teachings, and all who are very involved now, and the people who just went and got from storage yesterday, the things that have been around, that have come back here and come home. So now, this part of our soul family is deciding what we're going to do with it. And through grace, the best things are going to happen, because the intention of this church is to serve people. And so when we know that we're never alone, we always have all the help we can possibly help, that we can ask and have beings that have more power than we can ever imagine at our fingertips to help us with anything we ask for. Because if we keep in mind that it's always for the highest good of all involved, that's exactly what happened. And that's where this church is. It's the little church with the big heart, and we want the highest good for all involved. And I thank you for letting me share today.